I want to start this morning with something familiar. I know you all know these words, but if you would just listen along and please put your hands in up, Jaang. Jishim guimyongne shibang samse jemang chare songju ilche bultaya jung. We pay homage to the eternally existent assembly of all the Buddhas and all the 10 directions of the past and of the present and of the future, as countless as the lands and seas of Lord Indra's net. Jishim guimyongne shibang samse jemang chalhe songju ilche dalmaya jung. We pay homage to all the dharmas eternally existent in all the 10 directions of the past, of the present, and of the future, as countless as the lands and seas in Lord Indra's net. Jishim guimyongne shibang samse jemang chalhe songju ilche sungaya jung. We pay homage to all the congregations of the Sangha, eternally existent, in all the 10 directions of the past, of the present, and of the future, as countless as the lands and seas in Lord Indra's net. Thank you. Now, you all just chanted that a few minutes ago, right? So everybody should be familiar with those words. But I'm guessing some of you might not actually know what you were saying, depending on how long you've been around. And even some of you now may not be sure what the heck all of that means. So let's talk about that just a little bit. There's 2 bits in each of those verses. Obviously, I picked 3 verses out that have some things in common, right? There are 2 sort of repeating bits in each of those verses that might be confusing. The first one's really easy to explain. In all of the 10 directions. What are the 10 directions? Well, there's the 4 compass directions, north, south, east, west, and there's the 4 intermediate directions in between, and the last 2 then are the zenith and the nadir, up and down. So the 10 directions means all 10 directions, which means the whole world, the whole universe, right? Everything in the universe is what we're talking about. The more complicated bit, doesn't really focus on here, is the last phrase of each verse. Lord Indra's net. Who is this Indra person? Why are we calling him a Lord? Why the heck does he have a net? And what is he doing in our liturgy? Those are all kind of obvious questions to ask about those lines. The first term that I remember encountering sort of this image, this idea of a jeweled net. Some of you who've been around and heard me do talks before, I've mentioned several times about I kind of had a background in Unitarian Universalism before I got really, really deep into the Dharma. And I was at the big annual meeting that the Unitarian Universalists have every summer. And there was a session that was sponsored by a group called the UU Buddhist Fellowship. There are enough Unitarian Universalists who like Buddhism that they kind of have an interest group. And the speaker was someone some of you may have heard of, James Myoun Ford. Some of you may know him as an author. He's written a number of books. He was the first person, he's not the only one now, but he was the first person ever to be simultaneously a Zen Buddhist priest and a Unitarian Universalist minister. And he was talking about this thing called the jeweled net of Indra. And the reason he was talking about it was because the Unitarian Universalist sort of unifying document until very recently was something called the Principles. And one of the principles was directly inspired by this thing called the jeweled net of Indra. The line in their principles that kind of centers their congregation says, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And so what Myoun Roshi was talking about was how this idea of the jeweled net of Indra had inspired this idea, which then in turn, just a little interesting side tidbit, that thing from the UU Principles is what inspired Tim Berners-Lee to invent the World Wide Web. So that's where that internet thing came from. So we can kind of trace the internet back in some ways to the part we use the most on the internet, back to the idea of this jeweled net of Indra. Myoun Roshi said, when he was talking about it, that this imagery came from one of the many Mahayana scriptures, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra. And the more I studied Dharma, I kept seeing reference to this jeweled net in reference to this particular sutra, this Flower Garland Sutra. So when I finally got around to reading it in the most commonly available English edition, which is about that thick, weighs about 5 pounds. I was expecting to see, well, here's the chapter or the section that's going to kind of explain or walk through this jeweled net of Indra thing and what it was. And that didn't happen. I read the whole freaking book, and it didn't really, it mentioned it. There were a lot of references to it. There's jewels all over the place in that text. But it never kind of said, here's this thing, and here's what it means, and here's where I came from. It sort of didn't explain it. Now, I later found out that particular translator is, some people kind of look down on his work, and maybe it's not fully complete, and so I thought, well, did he just leave it out? Seems like a pretty big thing to have left out. That didn't seem likely. So one of my members at the Belmont Zen Center is very into this sutra. He's very into Logan. He's very into the Avatamsaka. Hi, Logan. I'm sure you're watching this. Very into the Avatamsaka Sutra. And he told me about a new translation that just came out. That's 3 books that are about that thick and weighs about 12 pounds, and I'm still working my way through that. And I found out about a recent book that just came out, kind of a commentary on it, which is only about that thing, which both of us have read, and it's a really, really good book. So as I got back into studying this sutra, I realized that the sutra itself doesn't actually explain this jewel net of Indra thing and what it means and what it's supposed to represent. It references it over and over and over again, but it never actually explains it. There's no description. There's no explanation. Now, let me give you an explanation. This actually comes from a different kind of source. This is from a book from 2014 all about Indra's net in Hinduism, right? This was written by Rajiva Malhotra. So I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs here from his book. Indra's net symbolizes the universe as a web of connections and interdependencies among all its members, wherein every member is both a manifestation of the whole and inseparable from the whole. This concept is the foundation for Vedic cosmology, and it later went on to become the central principle of Buddhism, and from there spread into mainstream Western discourse across several disciplines. The metaphor of Indra's net originates from the Artava Veda, one of the 4 ancient Vedas that the Hindu tradition kind of grew from, which likens the world to a net woven by the great deity Chakra, or Indra. The net is said to be infinite and to spread in all directions with no beginning or end. At each node of the net is a jewel so arranged that every jewel reflects all the other jewels. No jewel exists by itself independently of the rest. Everything is related to everything else. Nothing is isolated. Each jewel of Indra's net includes the reflection of all the other jewels. The significance of this symbolism is that each entity in the universe contains it within itself the entire universe. This idea, rather than positing interdependence among separately existing entities, asserts that the whole does not owe its existence to the coming together of individual parts that have independent existence. Indeed, the existence of each individual part is contingent upon and relative to the existence of the whole and all of the other parts. Yet paradoxically, each individual part also contains the whole within itself. Put simply, the whole and the parts are inseparable. Every jewel in Indra's net is a microcosm of the whole net. Every component is the cause of the whole and also the effect of the whole. Nothing exists outside the net. Important Buddhist texts use Indra's net to describe an infinite universe with no beginning or end, in which every element is mutually related to every other element. Indra's net is quintessential metaphor for Buddhist philosophy, describing how everything exists only in mutual causation with everything else, and nothing can be isolated. The Avatamsaka Sutra, which means flower garden scripture of Mahayana Buddhism, uses the metaphor of Indra's net to explain cosmic interpenetration. This sutra explains everything as both a mirror reflecting all and an image reflected by all. Everything is simultaneously cause and effect, support and supported. Or if you want to put that in a more pithy way, it just occurred to me, I don't have this written down, you can just quote Carl Sagan. who said, if you wish to create an apple pie, the first thing you must do is create the universe, which is kind of the same idea. So the metaphor of a jeweled net to represent the interconnected, interpenetrative nature of all existence predates the life of the historical Buddha by hundreds of years, having been recorded in this text, this Veda, that was passed down orally from we don't know when, way before 1000 BCE, long ago. In the early Vedic worldview, Indra was the god of the storms and also the king of the gods. Now, later he kind of lost status, so by the time we get the emergence of what today we would call Hinduism, Indra is actually kind of a minor deity, and Brahma and Shiva and Vishnu and Durga and these other deities are much more important. Buddhist texts like the Avatamsaka Sutra use this metaphor of the net, but they don't actually explain it because they assume the reader already knows about it, right? It's in the water. It's so familiar. It's so ingrained in the culture. It's just kind of taken for granted that it doesn't need explanation because it's already well known in the context of Indian culture. The symbolism was just kind of a standard cultural idiom with everyone's already familiar with it, so we can just take for granted that people know what this is. It would never occur to anyone in that era to need to explain it, right? It would be like us thinking we need to explain something that's sort of so fundamental to American culture that, of course, every American knows what this is. We don't need to explain this idea. So as the Buddhist tradition moved out of India, however, that shared cultural background was lost. You go into China, places like that, they didn't have that same cultural background. So teachers and scriptural commentators suddenly had to start explaining this. They had to start helping their students understand, what is this? What does it represent? So I'm going to read another little thing here. This is an example from Jaang. Jaang was a very important Chinese teacher. He lived in the 600s and 700s. He was the third patriarch of what's called the Huayin school of Chinese Buddhism. Huayin is the Chinese for flower garland. So it's a whole school within Chinese Buddhism that was primarily based on this text. So this is quoted from this book that I mentioned earlier, Ben Conley's Inside the Flower Garland Sutra. It is like the net of Indra, which is entirely made up of jewels. Due to their brightness and transparency, they reflect each other. In each of the jewels, the image of all the other jewels are completely reflected. This is the case with any one of the jewels and will remain so forever so. Now, if we take a jewel in the southwestern direction and examine it, we can see that this one jewel can reflect simultaneously the images of all the other jewels at once. It is so with one jewel, and it is also so with each of all the others. Since each of the jewels simultaneously reflects the images of all the other jewels at once, it follows that this jewel in the southwestern direction also reflects all the images of the jewels in each of the other jewels at once. It is so with this jewel, and it is so with all the others. Thus, the images multiply infinitely, and all these multiple images are bright and clear inside this single jewel. The rest of the jewels can be understood in the same manner. If one enters one jewel, one has, in fact, entered up all the layers upon layers of jewels in the 10 directions. Thus, while remaining in one jewel, one can enter all the infinite layers of jewels without actually leaving this one jewel. While remaining in the infinite layers of the jewels, one can enter this one jewel without actually departing from these infinite layers of jewels. Now, I'm sorry if this sounded a little academic so far. I apologize. I'm a college professor. It's hard not to do that. But I assure you that's not my intent. I'm not trying to deliver a dry academic lecture. I think this is a really useful thing in a really practical way in our practice, in our own personal spiritual lives. This imagery is very practical for understanding, in particular, one of the core elements of Buddhist teaching, pratitya samutpada. That's translated differently as interdependent origination, dependent arising, the 12-link chain of cause and effect. The Tathagata, the Buddha, taught that Everything is related to everything else. Nothing stands alone. Independence and autonomy are illusions. Everything that happens has a cause, which were themselves effects of previous causes, going back in an infinite regression of cause and effect. That's the idea. Now, that's a huge idea. That's, I don't know about your brain, my little dinky human brain, too much. It's too much. But if you think about this jeweled net of Indra as a metaphor, as an image that I can kind of picture this a little bit, right? Then it can be very helpful to sort of allow us to visualize at least a small scale, maybe, if not in infinity in all directions, and all space and time. At least in some way we can picture this. So you might want to close your eyes for a minute. Just sort of visualize this, picture this in your imagination. So picture the net, like a fishing net, but three-dimensional. A thick fishing net. Strings and knots. Strings and knots. Up, down, left, right, all directions. Strings and knots. But if you look more closely, the knots aren't knots. Every one of those knots is actually a gemstone. And each one of those knots represents everything that is, every person, every being, everything in the universe is a gemstone, a diamond, one of those gems with many facets. And the reflections of all the other gemstones, all the other diamonds of all the other people and all the other beings and all the other things are reflected in every one of those stones. Change one stone in any way, the net is different. Everything is different now. Pluck one of those connections, the whole net thrums. The whole net vibrates. The influence, the cause and effect propagates through the whole network. Everything's related to everything else. Nothing stands alone. Everyone is related to everyone else. No person is an island. You are one of those gemstones. Through the net, you're connected to every being, to every place in the world, to every event that has happened before, is happening now, will happen ever. We are all equally central to the grand web of the universe. It's infinitely big in all directions. There's no center point. Everywhere you go is the center point. We're no more or less important than any other diamond. Every diamond is essential to the net being what it is. Now, if you go back to the line from the chant, if Indra's net represents all the space and time, then, as the chant says, as countless as the lands and seas in Lord Indra's net means not just the entirety of the physical world of known existence, right? Obviously, every piece of land, every piece of ocean, the whole planet, the planets in the solar system, the sun, every solar system in the galaxy, every galaxy in the universe, around every star, everywhere, but all realms that may exist, all planes of existence that might exist, the ones that people think they've experienced is the ones we have no ideas about. Everything that exists in the universe is all connected. From the Mahayana perspective, these worlds are filled with Buddhas. They are replete with bodhisattvas, all propagating the Dharma to a cacophony of chanting practitioners, just like us. So we join them in paying homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space and time without exception. So in the future, when you chant the Yebol, as we just did, and as happens at this temple every week, I hope it will be more meaningful to you, right? And that this idea may inform your practice in a way that may allow you to to deepen and gather fruit from the work that you do here, the spiritual that you do here together as a community. Sangbala Shipshio, may you and all beings manifest enlightenment.